Thank you very much, Hans, for that kind introduction. It's a real honor to be back here. And I remember at the inaugural One Young World Summit in London, when I was 15 years old, I announced my first attempt to walk to the North Pole. And a few months later, I found myself standing at the edge of the ice, looking out over a stretch of open water extending seemingly forever into the distance. And that was the moment that I knew that I wasn't going to succeed in reaching the North Pole. And when I returned the following year to successfully complete the One Young World North Pole expedition, and the year after that for the Ice Talks North Pole expedition, the data from our research became a very small part of the frightening information we now have about how fast our climate is changing. We now know that the last 5 years, 3 years, have contained some of the lowest Arctic sea ice extents on record. And this past summer, we lost 97% of the Greenland surface sea ice sheet. Now, these changes are frightening, but despite this, they can seem often very intangible, very distant. But the scientific and economic evidence demonstrate a very different reality. The United States has had 330 consecutive months of temperatures above the average for the 20th century. This past July was the warmest month in the history of the United States. The drought caused 1,692 counties in 36 states to declare a state of natural disaster. It continues to affect 80% of the contiguous United States, causing massive crop failures, significant increase in food prices. But what is really most frightening about this, to me anyway, is that we were specifically warned that this would happen. And the economic implications of climate change actually extend into the energy sector as well. This year, governments will spend over $775 billion in taxpayer money subsidizing the fossil fuel industry. That's more than 10 times the amount that's given to the renewable energy sector. But we've been repeatedly shown that support to this industry is having undesired impacts and preventing renewable energy from becoming competitive in the market. In developing nations, up to 98% of consumption subsidies do not reach the poorest populations, the very people the system was implemented to support. In developed countries, 6 separate models have shown that production subsidies do not significantly lower energy prices. Eliminating fossil fuel subsidies would in fact boost annual GDP growth on a global average by 0.7% per year by 2050 and liberate over $750 billion per year. The phase-out would result in more than half of the reductions in emissions necessary to limit global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, which is the common target known to allow us to avoid the most extreme effects of climate change. To fund a dying industry is in itself inefficient. But to continue to spend hundreds of billions of dollars every year impeding global economic growth and worsening climate change is highly irresponsible. Three years ago, in this very building, in fact, the G20 made a bold collective commitment to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. For the first time in the climate change debate, the most important countries in the negotiations, India, China, United States, a few others, had been able to agree upon a potentially fundamental part of the solution. And yet, 3 years on, global fossil fuel subsidies have more than doubled, and governments have yet to deliver on their promises. Now we have before us a rare opportunity for global collaborative progress, one that does not make us choose between sustainable development and economic growth. But the foundation of international collaboration is accountability, and a lack of enforcement has allowed repeated delays in efforts to follow through on the G20's commitments. A worldwide monitoring body, which would oversee the phase-out and introduce mandatory reporting of energy subsidies on the international scale, must be established. And therefore, I call upon this delegation of 183 countries to return to your countries after the summit is over with a global statement in hand and request of your head of state a formal endorsement. Now, there are many people who believe that climate change is an issue that is just too big a challenge for us to overcome. But we cannot be intimidated by the scale of the challenge. We must remember that success in the face of difficult circumstances depends on our ability to take one strong step forward at a time. And accordingly, 1 year from today, I will embark on a journey to attempt to walk to the South Pole in a 45-day unsupported expedition from the coast of Antarctica. Beyond activating innovative research in partnership with several institutions from around the world, we aim to become a symbol for international collaboration on climate change action. We are asking leaders from each of the G20 countries to commit to a specific contribution to an independent international pledge on climate action and make measurable progress by the time we launch the Polar Orbiter expedition this time next year. Now, earlier in the summit, President Clinton reinforced that the need to prioritize sustainable development was one of the three major challenges facing the world today. And perhaps we should just ask that question to our one delegate from Tuvalu, whose country lost its entire supply of drinking water last year due to extreme weather. This is not a challenge of the future. This is a challenge that is affecting us all right now. It's a challenge of the present, and it should be treated as one. The science and the economics demand nothing less. Thank you very much again for this incredible privilege.